Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I think it's been about 15 years since I was in Wales, but I see the women still wear very short skirts no matter what the weather is. And they're still singing ABBA at 12 o'clock at night when you arrive, so that's wonderful.
Sorry, can you speak much louder and into the microphone?
Sorry, okay. What, you didn't hear my ABBA jokes? Okay. So I did have slides, but you're not going to get to see them. I have excellent reasons for it, excellent if improbable, for not having shared them earlier. I was stuck in a lift on my way here, but it was a great opportunity to remember the sort of that one person's disaster is another person's joy, because as I was being extracted by 4 firemen, a little kid runs by, looks at his mom and says, "Now can I go and look at the fire engine?" So I was like, okay, if I facilitated that, that's fine. But because I don't have slides, it gives us a great opportunity for all of you to imagine what the internet looks like in a post-net neutrality universe. In a free basics-driven walled garden, you can hear my talk, but you can't see the memes, the GIFs, no cat videos, which, you know, it's apparently good enough for poor people, so maybe you can survive for an evening. You know, it's a sort of, you get to experience the whole something better than nothing logic that underpins so much neoliberal technology in the rest of the developing world. So I had my Jodie Foster, you know, panic room moment, so you can get a chance to play act 2. So a couple of things I wanted to start with is, just as a framing thing, one is that the Global South is often a beta testing ground for so many emerging technologies, usually wrapped up in some kind of neoliberal spin, not the kind of fun spin that Steven does, no DJs involved, but the idea of leapfrogging is alive and well, the idea that, you know, we didn't need 3G, we went straight from 2 to 4 kind of thing, and that's happening with a lot of technology where we feel, oh, we don't need to sort of go this way, we can just go straight to the next generation, but without the safeguards that the West has. So I just wanted to put that out there, and we have bigger problems, bigger scale, more people, but less science fiction to scare us, so that's not good. But also I just want to sort of caution people in the sort of global north that be really careful about what you do, because we'll copy it. And we'll copy the worst of what you do without the best of your safeguards and constitutional guarantees. So, because one of the things that always strikes me is you talk about poor people, people think about, you know, India or China or other countries. Nobody thinks about poor people in Oakland and Detroit. And I think, why aren't you trying free basics in Detroit? Why is it being visited on us in India, right? There are poor people there too, but there are safeguards. So I think that's something that keeps getting driven home to me. So yesterday I was at an event which was, with Germany being the presidency of the G20 this year, there was an event on consumers and building trust in the digital economy. And this is sort of a list of, you know, my little pet peeves while everybody else was speaking. It was sort of like an access and inclusion 101, or also known as, you know, the 10 obvious things I wish our community never had to say again, which was kind of interesting given these were, you know, sophisticated people who work in this space. But one thing was, I wanted to keep screaming that users are not the problem, right? People keep assuming that, oh, it's, you know, it's dumb users, it's people who don't understand how to switch off the privacy settings, blah, blah, blah. And I kept thinking, you know what? If you frame users as the problem, maybe your technology sucks. Maybe you need to rewrite your code. Maybe you need to change your program. But on the other flip side, they're not the sole solution either. I think to the extent that we keep talking about transparency or giving people agency, that's wonderful on so many levels, but I think to some extent companies and governments are abdicating their own responsibility by pushing responsibility onto the people weakest in the chain, the ones least able to navigate technosocial systems. The third thing I wanted to say was the barriers to access and inclusion don't come from a single source. And therefore, the corollary is the solutions aren't going to come from one discipline either. So I think this sort of Morozovian solutionism, Silicon Valley sort of way of looking at things isn't the only way to be. And that when we think of social justice and data justice as well, there is this sort of fetishization of access and connectivity as if we just got all these people online, you know, democracy will miraculously happen. You know, if we could just connect them, never mind the terms of the connection, never mind on what terms they access and use whatever it is that they use, the thing they might be connecting to might be a very censored internet, but it's just this assumption that whatever they're connecting to, connectivity is good. So I want to keep sort of underlining that access isn't an end goal. It's a gateway to many other things. Maybe it's the gateway drug to other human rights, but we need to be mindful of that it's not a solution in itself. And similarly, this idea that inclusion isn't a problem that can be solved and then we can all go home. I think it's an ongoing process because we're going to have to keep including for different things. Society keeps evolving. So this idea of solved and next isn't going to work there. A lot of this underlines my view that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and this kept coming up in today's discussion as well, that asking for whom, why, what for, really basic questions, it really helps. One thing I keep being reminded of in my work is that marginalized users are not fools. They may be unsophisticated, but if you want the best data plan, ask a poor person, because every cent counts. People assume, there's this wonderful idea that poor users are very loyal, and they're not. They'll be sluts about going from one mobile provider to another. They'll have 16 different packages to game the system every way they can. So I think when we view people as being unsophisticated, it doesn't mean they're idiots. And I think on one hand this is true. On the other hand, when we're trying to drive access, inclusion, and other goals of social justice on the back of other programs, whether they're government delivery, benefits, welfare, it's not always to the benefit of the consumer. It's more efficient, but maybe it's more efficient for the company to keep costs down. It's more efficient for government to do surveillance. It's not necessarily for the end user. So I think try asking users what they want and need and how they use technology, and I think we might be surprised. So that was like 10 points, but I think I can give you a little 11 bonus, Brucey bonus, because I think poor people want to watch porn and watch video games as much as anyone else. This idea that they can edit Wikipedia, no, that seriously they don't want to edit Wikipedia. So this idea that we can give them a walled garden, they'll be fine because as long as they get Wikimedia, life is okay. No, not really. So a few provocations. I think a lot of this has already been said, so maybe I should just go into specifics. But one thing I want to really bring back this point. I think William Gibson said that the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed. And I think nowhere is that more true when it comes to justice. He was talking about technology and the future and this utopian view of this utopian imagination of the future, but I think when it comes to justice, that's even more true, that we live in a just society anyway, it's taken hundreds of years to get here, but that's unevenly distributed. But I think so too are the costs of being connected and the costs of disconnection. They're visited differently on different communities. The ability to opt out, the ability to say privacy is a luxury that I'm willing to pay for, or the ability to sort of say, I don't like this system, I'll stay out of it. I don't think we have that luxury in a lot of the developing world. It usually involves a trade-off for poor and marginalized people. They pay with their data, surprise, surprise, more surveillance, or with constraints like walled gardens, but I think we need to be mindful of that. So some of the tropes I keep hearing in my work is something is better than nothing. It's good enough for the developing world, it's good enough for poor people, or let's try something, they'll be grateful. Or Indians don't care about privacy, Chinese don't care about privacy, it's a cultural thing. But it's free, so what are they complaining about? It's a trade-off, it's a balance. So I keep hearing this, but I think for a lot of communities, they don't realize that if they're free, they're the product. We know this, they don't know that. And information asymmetries and negotiating positions are all about power differentials that can't be overlooked, and some places are worse than others. So what do I see as some of the challenges? One is that users are often seen as the object of projects to solve access, inclusion, and other social goals, not as equal participants. We're trying to solve their problems when they're not in the room. They're not in this room, they're not in most rooms. And access and inclusion don't just begin with seats at the table, but with genuinely being heard. So, of course, there's always the civil society box that gets ticked in every multi-stakeholder process. Now, there's a word I wish we never had to hear again. They're at they have seats at the table, but do they actually have an influence on the outcome? Do their drafts make it into the final version of any policy document that's adopted? Not really. And I think in sort of the centralization of solutions and the sort of scaling everything up to a global level, which is wonderful to shine lights on a lot of these things, I think we neglect that there are certain small grassroots solutions that are bottoms up that work really well, that are context specific, that work for local communities, that are embedded in local practices and are owned by communities, that they have a sense of ownership and belonging that seem natural to them, and some top-down view of what works because somebody will once publish a PhD paper on it and it'll live in a journal article that will be downloaded twice in its life. And there's no feedback loop. They're objects of research, but nobody ever comes back and says, you know what we did with that great research where you were one of the people we interviewed? Here's what we found. And here are the lessons, and would you like to use it in your own community? Maybe you're going to do government differently and disrupt things the right way. So I think that's a challenge. And I think there's also what I sort of see as a trust paradox where poor users don't trust governments. They're cynical because they've been screwed over by every system known to man. They will game it, they will find cracks, they will subvert it, they will abuse every system known to man. But equally, because they are super trusting about things they don't understand, they do need safeguards to be baked in at the platform and infrastructure level. So in the privacy community, you hear a lot of talk about privacy by design and ethics by design and all of these other wonderful buzzwords. But I don't think we talk enough about trust by design, where even if you wanted to, the system couldn't screw you over. And I think there are certain minimum safeguards and standards that we could build in. So I'm just going to throw out a little quote here and ask if you know where this is from. It's about allowing the trustworthy to roam everywhere under heaven while making it hard for the discredited to take a single step. Any ideas where that's from? Not The Wire. Not Black Mirror either. Sorry? Gandhi. Love it to be, but no. That's actually from China's social credit system, the new system that they're rolling out, where everyone will have a score, not just based on their own behavior and what they do, which is creepy in itself, but on what everyone else in their network does. So you take a loan, you don't pay it back, guess what? I don't get a loan next time, right? Which is super creepy. It's like surveillance on steroids. And it's sort of it's this idea of a public credit score, and there's a 2014 planning document about this, which talks about how it's an important component of the socialist market economy system, which to me read like an oxymoron, but that's just me. And its inherent requirements are establishing the idea of a sincerity culture. Also, I'm thinking Stasi and databases and census. But it's this idea of carrying forward sincerity and traditional values, where those lovely traditional values where, the village mentality where we report on our neighbors, that lovely value we want to embed. And it will forge a public opinion environment that trust keeping is glorious. I hear glorious, I think Borat, make glorious country of Kazakhstan kind of thing. But this idea that somehow, this new system will reward those who report acts of breach of trust. And I mean, the hubris of this program is just staggering because it's more than the social and it's more than credit. And to me, that's just insane. There are a lot of red flags with a system like this. Switching colors, it's a black box. But interestingly, algorithms under this system are treated as trade secrets. So God help you trying to find out what they're all about. So it's the same as trying to find out the formula for Coke, but with much more frightening consequences. And these government blacklists, which will surprise nobody, are being shared with private companies because what they're actually doing it's not one social credit system, it's being piloted across 5 different companies, all of whom are trialing different sort of implementations of this. And they're all sharing their data with the government, and it's this sort of bidirectional breach of trust. But they're closed systems as well, and there's also a lot of research about how the data that is generated internally, sort of in-app, your behavior in-app will be weighted more strongly than behavior outside of that ecosystem, which again is crazy. You have sort of vendor lock-in. There's a complete lack of context in this social credit system. Someone who borrowed their son's Metro card to go through the turnstile because there has enough money on it and it charges them twice is going to be treated the same way as somebody who broke through without a card. right? So there's absolutely, no lack of context. And there are 5 dimensions to this: credit history, behavioral habits, the ability to pay off debts, personal information, and social networks. Apart from that, you're fine. And why I found this super interesting is because this is something that keeps getting talked about. I live in Hong Kong, and China's next door, or technically we're part of China. So this keeps coming up, this sort of mega surveillance project, but it's not that different for me from the Indian Biometric Identity Project, which is the world's largest biometric database. And I think they have very similar ideas, because in one of the sort of NPR articles about the Chinese system, it talked about, I think it said, what's your public credit score? The Shanghai government can tell you. And that's very similar to all the posters for the Indian ID project, where they say, who are you? We have the answer. This whole idea of you don't exist unless you're in a database, or like, if you're not counted, you don't count. You have no benefits, you have no entitlements, you're invisible. But I think in terms of the sort of social justice angle, a couple of things I wanted to say before I wrap up was, there is this sort of very shiny, allegedly technologically neutral system being rolled out, allegedly for people's benefit. But then they found really weird things that they'd never anticipated, which was, and this is from an article by Ursula Rao and Graham Greenleaf in Surveillance and Society, where they're talking about subverting identity from above and below. And there's this wonderful paragraph where they say, as homeless citizens began enrolling, they found their fingers to be wanting, right? So even your body is imperfect in the face of this system. The first effort at encoding a perfect set of 10 fingerprints usually failed. The machines could not identify the unique contours of fingers damaged during a harsh life on the streets. Ironically, the very people that this project is supposed to bring into this sort of inclusive system. Enrollers began a struggle against the dust that had settled into the skin of manual laborers. A wet towel was passed from person to person. Rub your hands strongly, technicians would repeat, at times performing the procedure up to 5 times to produce a sufficiently detailed reading. It improved the success rate, but it couldn't help those who'd lost fingers or fingertips. Polio is still not eradicated, right? We have leprosy, we have all kinds of other problems. They were told to wait for a specially authorized enroller to arrive who could certify their disabled status. Waiting for Godot, This person never showed up, surprise. Thus, all those bearing the marks of high-risk construction industry in the form of deep scars, severed fingers, or mutilated hands, or those whose biometric data could not otherwise be registered, remained excluded. And I think one of the other really weird conferences I went to, it was the LGBT community in Bangalore, that when this project was rolled out said, oh, now we can register as male, female, or T for transgender. Wow, that's super inclusive for a country like India. But they were not idiots. They were like, wait, does this mean we just get listed somewhere? Do we want to sign up? Like, do we get benefits, or are they outweighed by this surveillance apparatus? Like, what do we do? So I was asked to go and talk to them about the legal implications of this. And of course, as the only lawyer in the room, in a room full of farmers and villagers, agricultural laborers, prostitutes, a whole bunch of different people from all kinds of gray economies, people were looking at me as the one who had all the answers. And people were asking me super strange things like, oh, so, I inherited 3 pieces of land as the oldest son in a Hindu Brahmin family. So if I now go and register and self-identify as female or as transgender, what happens to my property rights? Do I lose my land? And they're like, where is the clause in the law that provides for this? And you're going, you must be on drugs if you think the government has thought of that, right? Or people were saying, so far I've been able to game every system possible because for me, identity is fluid. I don't have to be fixated in a system as, anywhere. It's a spectrum, right? But gender and identity they're not binary things. So I can sort of show different faces depending on different contexts, based on religion, based on communities, based on who I'm talking to. So now do I get fixed in the system and frozen forever and ever? I can never negotiate my identity in ways that get me benefits and entitlements. Where does the law stand on that? And you're like, nope. Or like, I'm going through a sex change operation. I've got hormonal replacement therapy going on. My fingers are growing bigger. What happens? Will it sort of screw with the database? Will I keep getting pinged as a false positive or a false negative? How is that going to work? There have been tests and trials on this, right? And you're like, nope, I don't think so. So I just wanted to sort of highlight some of these. I was talking in very abstract terms earlier. I wanted to just sort of bring it back to very specific ways in which even projects that are allegedly benevolent and can be benevolent and, if well implemented, come up with all kinds of weird things that policymakers just have not thought about. And in embedding and encoding these sort of ideas and in moving them out into the real world without testing them, are we moving from some kind of panoptic sort to some kind of panoptic sort of? Might work, might not, who knows? I had a great big shruggy on this slide, which you don't see. But you know what shruggy looks like. So some of the patterns I keep coming up against is sort of technologies of surveillance plus social problems equals welfare industrial complex, almost instantly. And in a lot of the regions that I work in, people keep talking about privacy and security, and it's a really, really hard struggle for people like me, because someone in the room will say, I don't have food, I don't have clothing, I don't have shelter, I don't have education. You think privacy or security figure on my sort of Maslow's hierarchy of human rights? There isn't one, I just made that up. But TLDR, most things trump privacy or human rights. Security theater is alive and well. I mean, we've seen that with TSA, with everything else in the world. It's much worse in the developing world. Shoshana Magnet has written about this, about how even when biometrics fail, they succeed because people think they're working. Another pattern is sort of, if you even critique any of these projects, you're the Luddite, you're anti-progress, you don't like transparency, you're pro-corruption, you want the embedded system to be perpetuated, you're anti-national, somewhere you're not being patriotic if you come out here to Cardiff or Harvard or Oxford or anywhere and talk about the problems of India. Somehow you're sort of letting the side down. And it's really hard, which doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And the other, I think, one of the last points I wanted to make was that in a law and policy vacuum, you can amplify the negative externalities of a lot of these welfare projects. So my last slide was actually, or a couple of last slides, was how many people follow Research Mark Wahlberg on Twitter? What?
Oh, I know.
Research Mark Wahlberg? Like Marky Mark from the Funky Bunch? Yeah? No? The most anger management deprived fireman ever in cinema history. So there's this wonderful Twitter account that popped up, which was all about data and all the good things and bad things and all the awful things people do with data. But it's literally like little gifs of Mark Wahlberg saying things like, not cool, bro, clean your data. Or then he was like, big data is the new neuro. I know, right? So there are all these like wonderful like memes that are all about the awful things we do with data and regression testing and all kinds of things. So I would urge you strongly to follow Research Mark Wahlberg on Twitter about all the things wrong with sort of the data fetishization we see in the world. So to end, I just wanted to say that in a lot of the world, we're still in that sort of early 2000s idea of data is the new oil, data is the new gold, data is currency, data is blah, blah, blah ad nauseum. But what if we visualize these metaphors differently? What if we talked of data as toxic? What if we talked about it as asbestos that needs to be removed from buildings very quickly before people die? The idea of data as radioactive or digital kryptonite. There are different ways you can frame it to show how things like data minimization are really powerful and should be done, because data has a half-life. Data is not infinitely valuable. At some point it stops representing the data subjects that it's supposed to and renders them into objects. So in conclusion, I just want to say we could do all of these cool things, or we could just do more to make the idea of data justice ubiquitous, banal, and completely unremarkable. So congratulations to all the people who set up the Data Justice Lab. I wish you didn't have to exist, but I'm so happy you do. Thank you.